For over a decade, they've gathered every year at Rye Presbyterian Church outside New York City to celebrate how far they've come.
I work for preventive services. Preventive services, we work with family and children's services.
I work with Youth Turn. I'm a Youth Turn mentor. I work for a community-based organization in the Bronx serving the HIV-positive population.
They are the graduates of New York Theological Seminary's Master of Professional Studies program in Sing Sing Prison.
Dr. Bill Weber was responsible for me being able to attend New York Theological Seminary, so I personally want to thank him.
For many of these men, along with so many others, George W. Weber was the sower, the visionary, whose seeds are continuing to bear fruit in the world.
I'm here today because of the dreams of a giant of a man called Dr. George Bill Weber.
George W. Weber, known to most as just Bill, is one of the foremost names in urban ministry. He is associated with New York City, but he began his journey in a much smaller universe. He was born and raised in Des Moines, Iowa, and was influenced by the work of his parents, who were active in the YMCA and in the fight for racial integration. From Iowa, Bill went on to Harvard, where he met his wife Helen, a student at Radcliffe. After graduating in 1942, they married the following year. Both went on to serve in the Navy, where Bill received his first call from God to become a minister. The Webers then moved to New York, so Bill could attend Union Theological Seminary. It was while he was at Union, both as a student and later as Dean of Students, that Bill received his second call from God to develop new techniques to minister to the poor neighborhoods of New York City. Bill, Archie Hargraves, and Don Benedict, then all Union students, were the principal founders of the East Harlem Protestant Parish Group Ministry.
We did more than just have churches. We tried to serve as many needs as we could. Storefront churches were for the services on Sunday. They were dances on Saturday night. There were for education for kids during the day. It was very exciting, and you felt as though you were helping. And Bill's life was important because he was sending people to us from the seminary.
For more than half a century, Bill would live here in one of New York City's poorest neighborhoods, raising his children in public housing. Their ministry was supported by many churches such as Rye Presbyterian, Reformed Church of Bronxville, Garden City Community, and Scarsdale Congregational. The Benedicts, the Calverts, the Eddies, the Hammonds, the Todds, Letty Russell, the Webers, and other committed clergy families worked together to transform life in the inner city.
Recognizing that people were suffering right here in the local community and need the help of the church, I did a paper of the East Harlem Protestant Parish, and I decided from that that would be the kind of ministry that I would carry on. And so I was greatly influenced by Bill Weber.
Literally thousands of young ministers and college students were influenced for those whole 2 decades by the work of the parish, because it revolutionized the concept of ministry in the city for the Protestant churches in the last half of the 20th century.
During those days, there was an influx of new Pentecostal leadership. Bill made contact with them and brought the resources of mainline Protestant churches together with these new Pentecostal, most of them Spanish-speaking church leaders, to find ways that could strengthen their ministries. Eventually the program grew into after-school tutoring programs, drug counseling programs, and they continue today.
Bill worked at enabling pastors and laypersons to become engaged in the urban community. And he did this not with other pastors necessarily, but he had a knack of securing a host of laypersons, ecumenically so, and civil rights activists in training sessions well before its time.
He certainly was a very progressive fellow all his life, and in the early days of the Vietnam War, I know he handcuffed himself to some war resistors, and in the early days of the seminary, he painted a dove on the ceiling. And
I remember when he was arrested in Brooklyn, one of the early demonstrations at one of the hospitals that was going up over there.
Out of the unrest of the 60s, Bill, realizing there was still more to do, went on to sow his next seed, a brilliant new program called Metropolitan Urban Service Training, or MUST.
MUST was a kind of community organizing urban training center that was run in New York City. It was part of a master's in sacred theology and urban ministry. You did a year in MUST. So you learned how to study communities, you learned how to do demographic studies, sociological analysis, economic analysis, along with trying to think biblically and theologically about the city and the church.
So this was a grand experiment, I think, a training operation to train pastors and laypersons in all sorts of modules and models as to how to become involved.
Change was in the air, and New York Theological Seminary was looking for change too, so they turned to Bill Weber for leadership.
In 1969, when Bill Weber became president of New York Theological Seminary, the seminary was at a time of crisis. It was financially unstable, student enrollment was down, and so what Bill did is suspended the Master of Divinity program and turned it into a one-year program for an urban ministry plunge in the city, and then began looking at other kinds of programs that were needed by the churches they were working with.
There were several groups of people in the city and religious communities that were desperately in need of education that no seminary was reaching. These churches were doing an interesting job, but the clergy of most of them hadn't been to seminary. There was a tremendous eagerness to get that kind of education.
Bill began teaching in Spanish. We introduced a college finishing program, so there were a whole bunch of things that Bill was doing that were really looking ahead to where the rest of the theological world was going to be going.
By the early 80s, Bill was into another seed-sowing adventure initiated by Sing Sing supervising chaplain Ed Muller and Deputy Corrections Commissioner Earl B. Moore. Out of this collaboration came a revolutionary master's program in professional studies for incarcerated men of many faiths.
We need to learn how to function on the outside for our own selves personally.
Bill handpicked 16 men who had already completed high school and college, whom he believed were up to the task. The men made a commitment to Bill to help make change on the inside and to assume leadership in urban ministry once released.
Sometimes I would say to him, it's wonderful that you transform these people, and he says, no, I didn't transform them. They transformed themselves.
Good afternoon, Julio Medina. I work for a program called Exodus Transitional Community.
Julio Medina came out of the MPS program at Sing Sing. An honoree of President George W. Bush, Julio now leads Exodus Transitional Community.
My criminal mind said, this will look good for the parole board. A master's degree, you bring to the parole board. This will look good. Let's kind of ride this out. You know, I'm pretty smart. This is okay. Bill came in. He came in for us. He cared about us. He cared about our families. It wasn't he's, I don't know, Yale PhD or whatever else, Union Master's Divinity degree or the many other degrees he had. He was Bill.
I was one of those lock 'em up, throw away the key. And then we went to this graduation, and it just shot holes in my perception of what incarcerated people are. They were articulate, they were caring, they were devoted to their families. Bill really saw them as human beings.
In 1997, one of the graduates at a graduation ceremony said at Sing Sing, if I'd known people like the people I've met at New York Theological Seminary, I never would have come to prison. It was that speech at that ceremony which started Youth Turn.
Another seed that sprouted from Bill's work was the creation of Youth Turn, a program for youth at risk.
We have 10 churches in the city. Last year they saw more than 2,000 young people, with most of them who are being referred by the court system as an alternative to incarceration. They're doing outreach to the gang leaders. This is a phenomenal program with a recidivism rate of under 5% among the young people ages 12 to 21.
The Youth Turn program has established itself as a new model for urban youth ministry, having employed the formerly incarcerated, having used MDiv students as interns for a full year to do a whole year of field education working with at-risk youth, and housing that program in churches. That model also could be replicated nationally.
The Youth Turn ministry should be continued and expanded into the more language groups, not only Korean or the Hispanic, so it should be reached to any other language groups.
Today, NYTS continues to lead the world in urban ministry, work that is very much an outgrowth of Bill Weber's vision. In 2004, NYTS received a $2 million grant from the Lilly Endowment to establish the Ecologies of Learning project directed by the late Lowell Livesey. It is a reincarnation of the early work of Must. The program is being permanently planted within the seminary as the Center for the Study and Practice of Urban Religion, thanks in part to the support of the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations. A George W. Weber Chair in Urban Ministry and scholarships for students working in this discipline are also being funded to ensure that the seeds that Bill planted so long ago continue to grow.
When you think about training a religious leader in an urban setting, you have to think about Bill Weber first, because that was his bread and butter. That's what he did. And that's what we're trying to mimic in so many different ways.
There's a sort of a spiritual presence of Bill that people can tap into, even when they don't know it.
Bill would want all of us, the men who he touched, just to go out and continue doing this work, continue touching other lives. I think that's what Bill was about.
It's what discipleship is. To be a follower of Jesus, to try and emulate your own life in the way that Jesus lived his life. And Bill passionately believed in that.
Bill Weber showed us how to live. That is a great model.
Hopefully one day I'll be able to sit with him and take him back to the 60s and just say thank you.
God gives us angels, earth angels, that allows us to see what it means to be a servant, and that, I think, encapsulates my brother, Dr. Weber.
This structure is a Bill Weber legacy. This spirit of opportunity is a Bill Weber legacy. The notion that we can try things even if they fail is a Bill Weber legacy. He really opened the door to new possibilities for us, and we continue to do that under our current president.
God is clearly saying, hey, get together, you folks, figure out how you can complement one another, and this can be the most exciting theological seminary in the whole world.